Hi, AJ Hartley here, novelist, Shakespeare professor, fan of lots of stuff, and of course, somebody invested in publishing. Recently, I did a number of videos that were framed as a kind of Ask Me Anything about writing. And as is often the case with these things, I got a lot of questions that were more specific to publishing, along with all the stuff about craft. So I thought I would do a separate but related series of videos about publishing. Now, I can simply talk about my path to publishing, how I work with publishers, what kind of publishing I do, but I thought it would be more complete and more helpful to do a series in which I talk to other writers about their particular approach to publishing, in addition to me talking about mine, because publishing has become quite a complicated thing. So this video today will be a kind of introduction to some of what I'm going to talk about in the next videos. And I'll start by talking about my experience, but then I will leave room for people with more expertise in other areas of publishing to talk about what they do. Because here's the thing. I've been writing most of my adult life. And in the late 20th century, there was really still only one dominant mode of publishing. And that was what we call traditional publishing, and mostly traditional publishing with large presses. So when I started out, there were 6 major publishers, all centered on New York. Obviously, I'm talking about the US market, but these are global companies. Those 6 companies were Penguin, Random House, HarperCollins, Hachette, Macmillan, Simon & Schuster. Since then, Penguin and Random House have merged, taking the big 6 down to 5. In 2020, they attempted to also purchase Simon & Schuster, which would have taken us down to 4, but that deal was blocked. So there are still 5 major publishers. Now, those 5 major publishers own all kinds of separate imprints, but it means that when you're submitting to one of the big presses, you're mostly submitting to 5 companies. So, as I said, when I started out, these were the major markets. There were small presses that were tended to be focused on an individual genre, but they were nowhere near as visible as they have subsequently become. And there was no such thing as self-publishing. Also, I would say when I started out, things like audiobooks were very, very small, and digital publishing was non-existent. So the landscape has now changed. Now we have consolidation of what was the big 6 down to the big 5. And, as a general rule, I would say you can't really submit to them without having an agent. So at some point we should talk about how you get an agent, if you want an agent, if you need an agent. So let's talk a little bit about what makes these various publishing entities different from each other. The big traditional houses are doing what traditional publishing has mostly always done. That is, they pay you in advance if they approve your book, and that advance could be anything. It could be $1,000, it could be $10,000, $100,000 and up, right? Most of the time it's not, but it could be. That advance is then yours to keep, and then the publisher will take your manuscript, they will work with you on it with an editor. You don't pay for anything. The publisher handles editorial work, the publisher handles cover art, all that kind of stuff. And then when the book is ready, it comes out, the publisher is responsible for distribution, and it then shows up in retail venues, whether that's a Barnes & Noble or on Amazon or what. The publisher is responsible for all of that. You have your advance money, and then when the book starts to sell, you gradually earn back. Usually you're earning roughly 10% of what people are paying for the book. The majority of the money goes to publisher, retailer, and distributor. You get 10%. And you don't actually get 10% of every sale. until you have earned back whatever they paid you in the advance, right? So after you have earned back your advance, then you start making additional money. And many books, of course, never earn back the advance. So that's publishing with a big house. There are now medium-sized houses that are a little different in the way that they work, and I'm thinking particularly of Amazon-owned houses like Thomas & Mercer or Lake Union, both of whom I have published with. And there it's a little bit different because obviously the retailer and the publisher are the same entity. What this means in business terms, of course, is that your books are going to sell on Amazon and probably nowhere else. Most other retailers will not handle Amazon-owned books because they think of them as a threat. So if you go into a Barnes & Noble or something, you're not going to find books published by Amazon. The upside of publishing with Amazon, of course, is that you have the marketing muscle of Amazon, which can then insert its own books into the algorithms in such a way that you get more visibility. And one of the things they do, for example, is the First Reads program, where if you are a Prime member, you get a certain amount of free books. And the selection of those free books, surprise, surprise, is limited to Amazon-owned titles. I've been in those programs, and they have been responsible for moving, 100,000, 200,000 copies at a time. I don't get a royalty on those books because they are effectively being given away, but I am paid to be part of that program. And then the idea is the visibility created by the giveaway generates sales after the giveaway period has finished, which to a certain extent is true. That program has evolved a lot over the last few years. So, and I don't know that it's as effective as it used to be, but that's one of the advantages that you get with these medium-sized houses that are not working on traditional publishing lines. Below that, we have small presses, and small presses vary tremendously. Some of them pay you almost nothing in terms of an advance. Many of them are local and work primarily by word of mouth and in-person attendance at conventions and conferences and sales and such. I work with a small press called Falstaff Books, which works primarily that way. The books are available on Amazon, but the small presses don't have the marketing muscle to draw a lot of attention to books online. So often they are selling in person. Now, some small presses are doing the opposite. Some small presses live and die from online sales. So the model varies. You are less likely to make a lot of money with small presses because, of course, the sales numbers tend to be smaller, but they also cover all your costs. They take care of editorial. They take care of cover art. Most of the time, some presses might have some kind of relationship with the author, which is defined by the contract, in which the author is also contributing in some ways. I'm less comfortable with that. I think the job of a publisher is to shoulder those costs and responsibilities and to make sure that the book sells enough to bring that money back in. I don't think an author should be responsible for that if they're working with a publishing house. So they're small presses, but they still follow that traditional publishing model. Advance, even if it's a small one or non-existent, plus royalties, but no cost to the author. Then we have self-publishing. Self-publishing, as I said, did not exist as a thing when I was starting out. There were what they called vanity presses, where people, shouldered the publishing either through sort of desktop publishing models, which had come into being in the 80s and 90s, or where they were using companies who would publish for them and the author was covering all the costs. It might cost you several $1,000s to produce a book, which for the most part then sat in your garage in boxes and you gave away to your friends and family. It's called vanity publishing for a reason. Nobody expects to make money off it. Occasionally, maybe there's an exception where somebody does have a book that for some reason takes off. But if it does take off, it then gets picked up by a larger publisher who's then going to distribute it more widely. Problem with vanity publishing is that you have no distribution model at all. Again, remember, this was pre-internet. So one of the things that changes in the 21st century, of course, is that we move into a digital marketplace where self-publishing is now something that people can do sitting at home on their computer. They can have the software to turn their Word documents or whatever into a page layout format, and they can then convert it and upload it to Amazon or whatever. And you can have an ebook available in minutes. And you know, a lot of these programs use things like CreateSpace to be able to generate physical copies of self-published books as well. Initially, you could spot self-published books. The cover art was often terrible, and they looked clunky and amateurish. That has changed. There's now absolutely gorgeous covers on self-published books, and frequently when you're buying online, it's very hard to tell the difference between a traditionally published book and a self-published book. Self-publishing still doesn't get you into the Barnes & Nobles or the Books A Millions or the Waterstones or whatever. But in the present day, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You don't risk the cost of shipping books to stores. You don't risk the burden of what happens if a store decides that the book isn't selling and ships it back to you at the expense of the publisher. If you're self-publishing, of course, you are the publisher. So most self-publishers are not going to do that. They're going to make their book available on platforms like Amazon, where the book effectively doesn't exist until it's ordered, and then it's printed and shipped, right? One of the things that traditional publishers rely on is a print run, where they will literally print large numbers of books, 100,000 books, 200,000 books, or whatever, to ship to stores on release day. Self-publishing doesn't give you that option. Nobody's going to risk that kind of cost because the book might not sell. And as I say, with traditional publishing, they have to then bear the cost of not just the printing, but also the shipping if the book gets returned. And in the old days, you know, I've said this before, but in the old days, you know, when it came to things like paperbacks, they decided it wasn't even worth the cost to ship the entire book. So with mass market paperbacks, they would tear the cover off. The retailer would tear the cover off, throw the book away, ship the cover back to the publisher as proof that the book had been destroyed for a full refund. That's a scary business model, and it's one that, you know, understandably has put the big publishers under a lot of pressure. So in self-publishing, you don't have to do any of this. You use whatever resources you have to either pay somebody to do cover art, pay somebody to do editorial, and pay somebody to do final page layout and get it uploaded and ready to go, or you learn to do that stuff yourself. Those are skill sets that you can master without too much difficulty and do it. And a lot of self-publishers do all of that themselves, though I think that there has been more pressure on people to deliver more professional looking cover art. So a lot of writers are using cover designers, not necessarily artists. And there are, you know, there's been a lot of conversation about the use of, for example, AI, artificial intelligence, in cover design. And some people think it's morally reprehensible and very questionable. I'm kind of one of them. And some people think it's fine. And there are now some traditional publishers who have said that they will not guarantee that their artwork is not partly AI generated. Now, apart from taking the human element out of the design and the artistic, and not take it out, but minimize it, there's also the ethical question of to what extent what you're doing is benefiting from stolen artwork, because a lot of AI stuff, whether it's AI writing or AI art, visual art, is using materials that have been basically pirated and fed into their model learning systems to generate stuff. So I'm questionable. I have doubts about the ethics of that. Anyway, so If you are self-publishing, then you're going to do all this stuff yourself. Then you're going to put it up on Amazon. You're going to print some off maybe, or have it available as a book that can be purchased as a paperback, as a hardcover. You can do that now. You didn't used to be able to do it. Now you can. And you can make these things available yourself. The problem, of course, for self-publishers is that there's now so much self-publishing going on that the sheer number of titles on Amazon is going up by over 1 million a year. And the difficulty is not generating the work and getting it published. The difficulty is getting it seen. The difficulty is rising above the internet noise to have a book that will actually sell copies. And many, many self-published books do not sell at all. A few dozen copies a year is not going to get anything done for you. Now, that said, other self-published authors have found ways to generate significant sales and significant income from self-publishing. So part of what I'm going to do in this series is talk to people who have that kind of experience, which I don't. Right? As I say, I'm a traditionally published author. I don't do the self-publishing. Along the way, we're also going to talk about other things that have become significant money makers, including things like audiobooks, which, as I said before, didn't used to be a thing. It's now a very solid market. And I know of authors who make the majority of their money off audiobook sales. So we're going to talk about that. Again, that's not something I know a tremendous amount about. I think practically all my books are available on audio, and I've done a couple that were designed specifically for audio, and which did extremely well as audiobooks, but they were also sort of working with Audible as a traditional publisher, even though the format of the publication was an audiobook. When I was working with Audible, David Hewson and I did the Macbeth and Hamlet novels. We wrote them. We turned them in as if they were books. We knew they were going to be audio, so that affected some of the writing, but we turned them in as if they were books, and then that was it. And they told us who was going to be doing the narration, Alan Cumming and Richard Armitage, and they did all the studio work and so on, and the book came out with a cover and all the rest of it. So they were working as a traditional publisher. There are a lot of self-pub people who are effectively hiring readers and studio time or home equipment and doing it themselves. So that's another thing. Along the way, we will also talk about whether or not you need an agent, depending on what your publishing goals are or what you hope to achieve. We'll talk about things that agents can do for you in terms of things like rights. You can do some of things like foreign rights or subsidiary rights, TV rights, film rights. Some of that you can do yourself, though you're going to need some sort of entertainment lawyer or an agent who handles those kind of things because it can get complicated. But we're going to talk about all of that. But as I say, this is a huge subject. And I didn't want to try and pack it all in to a single video or a couple of videos where it's just me talking. I want to talk to people who know a lot about particular areas. So that's what I'm going to do. That will be what this series becomes. Feel free to contribute questions about specific ideas, which I can raise with people as we go. And hopefully you'll find it useful and interesting. So that's it. Watch for those videos coming up, and that's all I'm going to say for now. As ever, please like, comment, subscribe, check out my books, of course. Check out my Patreon page, and thank you to all my patrons who make this channel possible. Check out my merchandise, and that's it. I will talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.